All right. Some of you guys, maybe you've heard the saying that if something looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. That's right. And the place where I've seen it used the most probably is when a guy and a girl who say they're just friends are hanging out, and they talk all the time, and they call all the time, and they text all the time, and they're hanging out all the time. But you ask them, are you dating? And they're like, no. If it looks like a duck, and it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And if the shoe fits, great. But that's actually the kind of logic that the New Testament letter of James, I think, is using. And this spring, we've been going through this New Testament letter in the book of James. And it's written by Jesus' half-brother. And you could just imagine all the probably weird questions that James probably had growing up with Jesus being your big half-brother. He had questions and was a doubter and a disbeliever in the beginning, but he actually becomes one of the first pastors in the Christian church. And he's writing this letter, the book of James, to a group of Christians, or at least people who call themselves Christians. And he's telling them, actually, it doesn't matter what you call yourself. It actually doesn't matter if you don't think that you're dating. If it looks like a duck, and it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. Because there are times in life where what you say matters less than what you do. And that's what James is talking about. He's talking to a group of people who have faith, who maybe they say they believe in God. They're not atheists. They believe in Jesus. They say that they're Christians. But he's saying, but does your life look like it? Because if your life doesn't look like it, then it doesn't matter what you say. Because how you live matters more than what you say. His whole letter, he's asking the question to a group of people who would say that they're Christians. They have faith. Is your faith dead or alive? Now, obviously we don't live in a Christian culture, right? And actually when social media, when Christianity pops up on the news, there's a lot of negative things said rather than positive things. But generally, in America, and especially in our area that we live in here, there's a lot of people around us who would say that they're Christians. But the question that James asks us is your faith dead or alive? The thing that he's going to tell us today is that faith without works, faith where your life doesn't reflect it, is dead. And living faith is a faith that does something. So, we're going to look at dead faith first. That's what he talks about. He's going to talk about faith without works is dead. We're going to make some observations of dead faith. Or we're going to do like an autopsy. Do you guys know what an autopsy is? Yes. What is it? Exactly. You look at a dead body and you get to determine the cause of death. We're going to look at what James says is dead faith, and we're going to do an autopsy. So, James chapter 2, starting in verse 14. James chapter 2, starting in verse 14, says, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warmed and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." So we're going to pause right there. We're going to make some observations. First, if you look at the beginning of verse 14, he says, what good is it? What good is it? What good is faith that someone says, yeah, I have faith. I believe in God. I'm a Christian. But they don't live it out. They don't have works. He says, he's asking a rhetorical question. He says, it's useless. Faith without works is useless. And then he asks another rhetorical question. Can that faith save him? When someone asks a rhetorical question, the answer should be obvious. If someone says that they have faith and they don't live it out and you can't see it, he's asking the question, can that faith save him? What's the answer? No. That kind of faith cannot save you. And then verse 15 and 16 gives us example of where a Christian, or someone who calls himself a Christian, they go and they see a brother or sister. And so particularly, this is probably another Christian, but you can expand it out to non-Christians. You see another Christian who doesn't have the right clothes that they need. They're poorly clothed. Their clothes are all tattered and they don't have the food that they need. And they say to them, have a good week. God bless you. I'm praying for you. Have a good time. It's like seeing someone at church on Sunday who you know that they have nowhere to go. They don't have the food. They don't have the clothes that they need. And you're like, have a good lunch. God bless. Have a good time. Faith that doesn't have works, dead faith, doesn't do anything. It doesn't act. You can't see it. And another thing that we see about it is that faith, dead faith, it sounds loving while not actually doing anything. Dead faith sounds spiritual. It sounds loving without actually doing anything. He says, it's the kind of person you see someone like, because it feels a lot nicer. You feel kind of mean, right? You're not going to go and tell somebody, I'm not actually going to help you today. I don't really want to. Instead, probably your normal person who would call themselves a Christian would be like, go in peace. Be warmed and filled. Have a good day. And James says that kind of faith sounds loving, it sounds spiritual, but it can't save you, and it's useless, and it doesn't actually do anything. So, verse 17 says, so faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. So another observation about dead faith. You can't see it. You can't show it. You can't prove it. It's like, I don't know, how many of you guys have ever gone fishing before? Anybody? Okay, some of us. It's like when someone comes back, especially guys, they come back from their fishing trip and they say, the fish that I caught was this big. And every time they tell the story, their arms get a little bit wider. But no one saw it. And they didn't take a picture of it. And it's like, well, if all you have is to tell me and it gets bigger every single time, I don't actually believe you. You can't prove it. James is saying, you can't prove dead faith. You can't see it. Verse 19. He says, you believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Okay, so now he says, dead faith can believe true things. Dead faith can believe true things. It can have correct theology. It can believe true things about God. Right? And the example he uses, he's like, you believe that there's one God. You believe that God's one. He's like, good job, you did it. That's true. There's only one God. There's not lots of other gods out there. There's only one God. And he's like, guess what? Demons believe that. Demons believe, they know that there's one God. And if you remember, during the time of Jesus in the Gospels, if you've heard and read some of these stories, that when demons come into the presence of Jesus, they're like, Jesus, what are you doing here? You're going to kill us. They know who Jesus is. And he says here, they shudder. They're afraid. They know Jesus is powerful and it's going to destroy them. But it doesn't change them. They're still evil. They don't love people and they don't love God. They believe facts about God that are true and it doesn't change them. And he says, Yeah, if you have dead faith, if you only believe true things and you don't live it out, then your faith is the faith like demons. And then verse 20 says, do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Okay, he ends that portion by saying what we've been saying the whole time. He says, dead faith is useless faith. These are harsh words. And you kind of read it and you're like, it almost feels kind of mean, James. Like, why would you talk this way? Like, these are people who call themselves Christians. These are people who say they believe in God. Like, why wouldn't you encourage them rather than saying, you know what, your faith is dead? Well, because they're on their way to head it off of a cliff, and he's trying to hit the brake. And he's saying, stop. If you keep going this way, you won't like where it ends up. And so he's trying to pull them up by their profession of faith and say, okay, you think you have faith? Like, you say you have faith? You say you're a Christian? Okay, this is what a Christian's like. Like, I don't know how many of you guys in this room, you guys would be like, yeah, I'm a Christian. I believe in God my whole life. I'm not an atheist. I want to be a good person. I've been baptized. I've done all these things. But what James is encouraging us to, and actually warning us against, he's saying, yeah, but it actually doesn't matter if you say you're a Christian, if your life doesn't reflect it. It doesn't actually matter if you say you believe in Jesus and you believe right things, if your life doesn't reflect it, because your faith is actually dead. And so what he's doing is he's trying to shock you. He's trying to hit the e-brake on your life and to say, hey, wake up. You're headed off the cliff. But then he talks about what living faith looks like. He tells us that living faith is faith that does something. Look at verse 21. He says, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. Okay, we're going to pause right there. So James brings up this Old Testament character, this Old Testament story about this guy named Abraham. Now, I know a lot of you guys in this room, you guys have heard about the story about Abraham. We don't have time to go through the whole entire story of Abraham. But if you guys grew up in church, you know that Father Abraham had many what? Yeah, you guys are right. But if you guys come to church in 2 Sundays from now, I'm actually going to be teaching and preaching on the story of Abraham. So if you guys come, you guys will be hearing that. But to sum it up, Abraham was a guy, God promised him, hey, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Like, I'm going to make your descendants as many as there is pieces of sand on the seashore. I'm going to give you as many descendants as there are stars in the sky. And the problem is, Abraham's really old. And his wife is really old. And they can't have kids. And so they're kind of waiting around. They're like, okay, God, anytime now. And finally, God gives them one son named Isaac. And they're like, okay, yes, God is finally coming through on his promise. And then God tells Abraham, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to sacrifice Isaac. Kill him. And maybe you've never thought about it this way, or maybe you're hearing this for the first time, and you're like, what? You're maybe having the same thought as Abraham. Be like, God, wait, you promised me I'm going to be a nation. I'm going to have many descendants. I only have one son. If you're going to fulfill your promise, like it has to be through Isaac. There's nobody else. And this doesn't make sense. And sometimes God asks us to do things that don't immediately make sense to us. But Abraham goes. He goes to this mountain. He starts walking up this mountain with his son Isaac. And Isaac's actually old enough to walk with him. And he asks his dad, okay, Dad, you said we're going to go sacrifice. Where's the animal? Like, can you imagine being a dad and you're about to go sacrifice your son and your son realizes what you're about to do to him? Like, you can just only imagine what's going on in Abraham's heart. But they get up to the top of the mountain. He binds Isaac. He gets him ready on the altar. And Isaac, at this point, he knows. He knows what's about to happen to him. He sees his dad. And Abraham, he basically has two options. Either I'm going to do the thing that makes sense and appeal to what I know God told me. I'm going to give you this through Isaac. My promise is Isaac. And be like, God, you promised me Isaac. You gave him to me. I'm going to go with him. I can't kill him. It doesn't make any sense. Or he can say, you know what? I don't understand what God is asking me to do or why he's asking me to do it. It doesn't make any sense. But he asked me to do it. And so I'm going to do it. So he goes and he lifts the knife to sacrifice his son, proving he was actually going to follow through, proving Abraham actually had faith. And at that moment, when he raises the knife, God stops him. God stops him and says, okay, Abraham, stop. You've proved that you have faith. Not because of his words, but because of how he lived, because of his actions. So he's saying, how do we know that Abraham had faith? By his actions, how he lived. And instead of sacrificing Isaac, God gives him a ram. Okay, Abraham, sacrifice this ram instead. Don't kill your son. And while we're here, this is actually really important. Because God allows Abraham not to kill his son. He gives a ram instead. This is actually what God does for us. Because we're sinners. The Bible says that you and I, we do things that we know we're not supposed to do. We do things that go against God. We do things that the Bible calls sin. And the Bible says that the penalty for sin is death. What Abraham did to that ram is what's supposed to happen to every single one of us. And instead, God sends his only son, Jesus. And instead of, Abraham, he actually got to have his son be spared. Like, Isaac didn't need to die. God follows through. The knife hits Jesus. Jesus dies on the cross. Not because he's a sinner, but because we are. So that by his blood, by his sacrifice, he's taking our place. So that anybody who would have faith in him, who would have living faith, would have forgiveness, could have salvation, could have relationship with God. And if you're here and you know you haven't done that, you can do that today. You can place your faith in Jesus. And then he gives us another story about this woman named Rahab in verse 25. In the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? Again, he's referencing an Old Testament story in the book of Joshua. A really short story of what matters from what he's using is that the Israelite people in the Old Testament, they were going to go take over this city called Jericho. And so they sent 2 spies into the city to spy it out. And there, they get found out, and the city's coming to look for them so that they can kill them. And they go, and this woman named Rahab, who's a prostitute, who's living how she shouldn't live, she takes them and she hides them on the roof, and then those guys come knocking on the door looking for these spies, and they're like, hey, where'd they go? And she goes, they went that way. Go find them that way. And she saves them. The only reason why she can save them, because these people, the city, these soldiers, if they find out that she's lying to them, they will kill her. The only reason why anyone would save these spies is because she believes that the God of Israel is more real and more powerful than these soldiers. And we know that she has faith, not because of what she said, not because she said, I believe in God, but because of how she lived. That's James' point. In verse 26, it says, the body apart from the spirit is dead. So also faith apart from works is dead. How do you know a body's alive? If someone's not moving and you want to know if they're alive, you have to go over and you got to poke them. And they open their eyes and they start moving their body. You know that they have a soul, that their spirit's still in them, that they're still alive because they're moving. James is saying that's the same thing that your life does for your faith. We know you have faith because you do something. Because of how you live. Living faith is faith that does something. Now, the last thing I want to address is maybe this question that this passage can make is kind of confusing. Verse 24 says that you see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. How many of you guys were here in October when we did that 5 Sola series? Yeah, so a lot of us in the room. In that series particularly, I literally said, it's faith alone that justifies you. Justification is a big fancy Bible word that basically just means that you're forgiven, that you're declared innocent, that you are righteous. And in the Bible, in Galatians 2:16, it actually says, the Apostle Paul actually says, we know that a person is not justified by works of the law, but through faith. So Paul says, justified by faith alone, not by works, and James says, justified by works, not by faith. So what's going on here? Is the Bible contradicting itself? Because that's kind of what a lot of people say, right? Like, there are a lot of people who aren't Christians that would come up to you if you're a Christian and be like, hey, your religion is kind of silly. Your book is broken. It contradicts itself. It says one thing and then it contradicts itself by saying another thing. Don't you realize that? So what's happening here? Well, I think there's a really easy explanation. James and Paul are talking to 2 different groups of people. Paul, he's writing to a group of Christians who are tempted to make God accept them